Okay.
Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on festive economy and e-commerce sales of small and medium businesses in India. I'm Garima Sodhi, Senior Policy Analyst at CUTS Institute for Regulation and Competition. As you know, with a diverse population housing several vibrant cultural communities, India is rightly called the country of festivals. Celebration of festivals not only creates a common bonding, but it also benefits the economy as it drives the consumption of gifts, clothes, household items, food, etc. Sales of articles like earthen lamps for Diwali, gulal for colors for Holi, and Rakhi for Raksha Bandhan is peculiar to the time of festivals, and the small sellers, they wait an entire year to sell these offerings. The festive economy also results in a lot of direct and indirect employment. However, the outbreak of COVID-19 impacted the festive sales due to lockdown and fear of the spread of COVID-19 virus, and small sellers suffered the most. As per a survey conducted by All India Manufacturer Association in 2020, 35% of small businesses and 37% of self-employed individuals shut down their business as they considered it impossible to recover from losses caused due to COVID-19. To gain further insights about the consumer usage and experience of e-commerce and digital sales of SMBs during the time of festivals in India, CIRC has undertaken a research study on the festive economy. We surveyed more than 300 consumers across the country to understand e-commerce shopping behavior, and also conducted some telephonic interviews of small e-commerce sellers as case studies to understand the e-commerce experience. The report will be out soon. So the objective of today's webinar is to discuss e-commerce channels as a vehicle to catalyze the festive business, growth for SMBs in India, and the opportunities and challenges of SMBs in leveraging e-commerce platforms, particularly during the festive season. We have a very distinguished panel today consisting of Shri Bidyut Swain, Secretary, Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises, Shri Ramesh Abhishek, former Secretary, Department for Promotion of Industries and Internal Trade, Shri Kundan Kumar, Joint Secretary and Advisor, Niti Aayog, Shri Vinod Kumar, President, India Forum SME, Shri Pradeep Mehta, Secretary General, CUTS International. The panel will be moderated by Dr. Arvind Mayaram, former Finance Secretary of India and Chairman, CIRC. Dr. Mayaram, over to you for an insightful discussion on the festive economy in India.
Thank you, Garima. First of all, I'd like to welcome all the panelists. We have very distinguished panelists, and they represent an entire universe of MSMEs and e-commerce together. Their experience and their understanding of the subject under discussion is going to make the discussions very rich, and also perhaps add a lot to the understanding of the subject, which is still evolving. And policymakers are also still grappling with several of the parameters of this universe, which will impact going forward in the next 5 to 10 years, how the internal trade or external trade from India grows, and how it also adds to not only the wealth in the country, but also jobs and livelihoods. The subject today, of course, is on festive economy in the country, and how the festive economy drives sales, which in turn drives production, which in turn drives creation of jobs. It's a kind of a virtuous circle which is created, cycle which is created in the economy. And therefore, at this point of time, when we are seeing that demand has been to a great extent destroyed by the COVID-19, and the MSMEs are struggling. Close to 60 lakh MSMEs seem to have closed down. We need to understand once again how aligning ourselves to the festive economy in the country and providing that kind of integration to the MSMEs may again start the virtuous cycle that I was speaking about. Now, in this context, it's important that we understand how to begin with, how the MSMEs were impacted by COVID-19, and did the e-commerce uh, framework really help the MSMEs during this period to be able to survive or to be able to find new channels of sales? And therefore, does it have a bearing on how there is going to be an interplay between the MSMEs and e-commerce platforms going forward? Uh, as Mr. Vidyut Sen, who's secretary in MSME, sits in the seat where he has an overview of how MSMEs are doing in the country and how policy interventions are being designed to help the MSMEs. But may I request him to come in with his reflections on how COVID has impacted MSMEs, and did e-commerce really help the MSMEs to an extent during this period? Mr. Swain.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. So I'm quite grateful, sir, to be invited to a panel of extremely esteemed speakers. So you raised two essential questions. Before that, so the title, the festive economy and e-commerce sales to small and medium businesses. Sir, I would maybe request you to add micro as well, because
Yes,
micro happen to be 94% of our
That's right.
business. I'll just, for the sake of the information of the panelists, we started something called Udyam registration system, a very, very logical, scientific kind of a system, which actually cross-checks with GSTN and cross-checks with PAN data.
Mhm.
And it's a very, very verified data. Today, we have reached almost 7.2 million as on date.
Okay.
Every day, we keep getting about 25,000 entries, which is, I think, a very sound database, which is growing. And for the first time, this is the second year, so it has started also giving us data regarding the growth, the kind of turnover they had last year, the kind of turnover they have at this year. So I think over a particular period, as Udyam keeps building into a very, very verified, very good quality database, this will also give a lot of, I think, help in policy directions in future. And quite obviously, this data is being used by many, and 94% happen to be micro. Because, sir, as you know, in 2020, all the definitions changed. So quite a few which could have been small at some point of time today are actually micro. They have moved in that kind of a direction. And that's why it is essentially micro, sir. The impact of COVID-19, sir, it has impacted every possible sectors. We have had few surveys. It has definitely indicated that particularly for those specific months, there are 3 to 4 months of the lockdown and all, you know that many of these micros did report temporary closures, maybe also because of state directions. In many cases, it was the lockdown. But it also shows a lot of tendencies, recent SIDBI surveys, recent other surveys, is also showing about the resilience of this particular sector and how they easily come back to it. The e-commerce part of it, sir, I think it's no longer a luxury, it became an inescapable reality. I think down to micros, everybody realized that this is some sector. Today, sir, if you really look at it, a lot of this e-commerce is no longer being done out of the metros. It is being done out of tier 2 cities. It's being done out of villages also. Maybe the things where the policy should start moving in is how do we enable them not only to learn how to do e-commerce, also do better things like packaging, like certain other things which probably adds to the value. So I would end at this point of time. The esteemed panelists will be making comments on this. I would just put it this way, sir. The sector was affected like any other sector affected. This sector has huge resilience. It is definitely coming back. And e-commerce definitely has become now an inescapable reality. Everybody knows that this is something, the way things will be. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vidyut. I'll come back to you on this because you have raised some very important points, and especially the issue about the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, even villages, as you mentioned, and also the need for capacity building, especially in terms of packaging, in terms of insurance reaching them, and all those other allied services which are required for e-commerce to really thrive from these areas. But before that, let me ask Ramesh, Mr. Ramesh Abhishek. Ramesh, would you, because you were at the time of the FDI policy being made and other, you would realize that there is this whole issue about how e-commerce will grow. Ultimately, as Vidyut has mentioned, that it is now reaching out into smaller towns, into tier 2, tier 3 towns, into even villages, as he mentioned it. And he made a very important point about micro industry also. You require much more complex, sophisticated, technology driven e-platforms, which will create much greater confidence in both consumers and sellers, which also means that there is a need for allowing a lot more technology, including FDI, to come into this particular field to be able to allow for them to be able to make that kind of contribution. Uh, is India's policy framework for e-commerce conducive for MSME? Let me first ask you this question. Is there any kind of a contradiction between the e-commerce policy and the development or growth of MSMEs through trade using the e-commerce channels? And would you also like to put some light on why is it that we have still a lot of confusion on FDI in e-commerce? Because we see a lot of contradictory policies being enunciated by different departments. So what is happening is that there's no single department which looks at it. Sometimes we see consumer affairs coming up with some guidelines, and sometimes it is the DPIT which brings in some other kind of guidelines. So do you think there is some still some lack of clarity in this direction? Ramesh?
Sir, thank you, sir. Sir, this first time there was a FDI policy on e-commerce was in April 2016, sir. Before that, there was no formal document. And all that did was to kind of legitimize the e-commerce operations by foreign-owned and controlled companies. That the fact that they could do only marketplace model, the kind of services they can provide in terms of order matching, collecting the sale proceeds, delivery, etc. So at least sir, that was some advance, because till then nothing was documented. So the challenge has been that FDI policy on e-commerce has been guided primarily by the earlier FDI policy on multi-brand multi-brand basically. And the problem is that if you allow inventory model of e-commerce with foreign owned and controlled companies, then in effect that becomes allowing FDI in multi-brand retail. That has been the main challenge, sir. So the government has been very conscious that they would like to see the growth of e-commerce sector. And sir, in that 2016 budget, there was a provision made that the farm produce, fresh farm produce or food made in India can be sold by FDI owned companies also through inventory based model. That was basically to help the farmers. So that there is a recognition in the government that in some cases you do need to support producers. So my opinion throughout has been that not that much attention has been paid to how to facilitate MSMEs through e-commerce, because the potential for supporting MSMEs marketing efforts through e-commerce are tremendous. Sir, we did a lot of survey research at that time that in China, e-commerce played a very important role in development of MSMEs. And here, sir, our MSMEs, as we all know, they actually work very hard to compete with very cheap Chinese products. And they have a huge disadvantage in terms of competing with them, because they face several disabilities which these imported goods don't face. So, sir, the promoting marketing, I have always thought through e-commerce, which severely, completely extends their reach, is very important to support the MSMEs. And also, sir, the branded products, I mean, because a lot of MSMEs don't come out with branded products. If they sell through e-commerce, they get a better price for their produce, because that gives them a kind of a legitimacy. So, sir, in my view, the e-commerce policy that we need should be a part of the overall policy on trade, because one policy on e-commerce, one on retail trade, offline, let's say retail trade, and FDI policy again having several contradictions. I think, sir, needs to be all addressed in a manner, first of all, that takes the interest of all stakeholders. MSMEs employing 100 million plus people are, I think, the very critical. Number one could be consumers, of course, and then second could be MSMEs, and others are all intermediaries. Whether, sir, it is e-commerce players or whether they are offline traders, they are all intermediaries. So, sir, this discussion on how e-commerce policy should be made has been driven primarily by intermediaries. It should be driven by producers who need to produce and employ people, and they need to be driven by consumers who are the primary beneficiary of this technology-driven channel.
But do you think that this, in terms of the FDI policy, see, there is this whole kind of gray area where you have e-commerce, so you have which would be known as national e-commerce platforms. Then you have the foreign-owned platforms, and there is a distinction between the two as far as the policy is concerned. So what is happening is it is not just the e-commerce in terms of retail, but it is also in terms of what happens within the domestic and the foreign e-commerce platforms. Do you think it would benefit the MSMEs even more if we had a level playing field, a less complicated e-commerce regime, which would then help in the growth without too many restrictions?
Sir, so far as I mentioned, the e-commerce space has been driven by FDI and related policies. When the moment you look at e-commerce, to be a level playing field between all the policies, laws, regulations, and say, for example, in Consumer Protection Act or Intellectual Property Right Act or IT Act, those are applicable to everyone. So, sir, there has to be same laws have to be applied, because if inventory model of e-commerce is not good for, let's say, any particular stakeholder, then it is not good whether it is offered by domestic players or foreign FDI controlled companies. So, sir, the policy, overall government policy has to look at everyone in the same manner, whether they are foreign owned or domestically owned, because the issues will be same so far as the stakeholders are concerned.
Right. I think that's a very important aspect that you have brought in. May I ask Mr. Kundan Kumar, is Kundan there on the panel? Kundan, are you there?
So, good afternoon, sir. I am here, sir.
Hello, Kundan. Good to see you.
Sir. Good to see you too, sir. And I am so thankful and I feel so fortunate to be among my esteemed seniors who I always revered, sir. I can see Ramesh, sir, here. I can see you. So I can see Secretary MSME, sir, here. So I don't know whether I deserve to be here or not, but no, but I'm forced.
You very much deserve to be here because you're holding the flag for Niti, which is a very important part of policy making.
And my candidate admission, sir, I've been also forced by my vice chairman to be here.
I'm glad.
I was like scared seeing the names around, so but I thought, it would be a good experience for me as well, sir.
No, I'm glad you are here. But tell
Thank
us,
you so much, sir.
how are you in the Niti from the perspective, a vintage perspective of Niti Aayog? How do you see how is e-commerce adoption in India growing? Is it growing rapidly? Is it in sync with our projections of how it should be growing? And what has been the consumer experience of e-commerce in India? What is it that attracts consumers to e-commerce? What drives the faith of people in e-commerce? Because it's fairly new. So how does it? How do you see this sitting where you are?
So in NIFI, I also look after industry vertical, which had for some time MSME within it. So now the MSME is not with me, and then I'm somebody who look after startup and e-commerce, so a bit of division here. But with whatever information that I have, because in industry vertical, we have undertaken a project to actually see how e-commerce can benefit MSMEs. And this project we chose only because this sector is very, very fast growing, sir. And e-commerce, I think all the esteemed panelists would agree with me that it has transformed the way the business is done in India, and it has become a catalyst for the growth of digital economy. And the intermediaries which are connected with e-commerce platforms are stitching together various parts of the ecosystem to create, and they have been successful in creating a coherent and trust-based system connecting sellers and buyers. So it has become a trustworthy marketplace where buyers and sellers both have shown confidence. And I have data with me, which is by IBEF, which is India-based India Brand Equity Foundation. And they have predicted that it is expected to grow at 84%, and this entire e-market place is gonna reach up to 111 billion US dollar by 2024, by 2024, and around 200 billion dollar by 2026. So altogether, it is going to become very big. The rate of growth is very big, and therefore, and there couldn't have been a better time to have this seminar, sir. As far as your question related to the satisfaction of the customer, sir, the same survey has indicated that it is going, the safe deliveries, the competitive prices, ease of return, products, the range of product selection, faster deliveries, product information, and the choices that the buyers get on this have made it a very, very attractive platform. And therefore, customer satisfaction is quite a lot there. And a lot of us are personally being benefited by these e-marketplace.
But do you think, one of the things that in the last 2 years, we have heard repeatedly by the both the traders as well as the manufacturers is that much of the sales used to take place around festivals in India. But because of the lockdowns, because of the COVID restrictions and going out, a congregation of people, etc., there was a major setback to the sales and therefore the profitabilities of such businesses. Is there any evidence to show that e-commerce did provide some kind of a relief during these kind of times to the sellers as well as to the producers, especially the MSMEs, I would say?
So during COVID, I mean, it's a known fact that it has every buddy took a hit, it did not even spare MSMEs. But the good thing is that, the demand, in your statement about the demand something, but I would like to inform the August gathering here, the demand has started picking up, sir. And if I have to quote a data, it says that, e-commerce players have gross merchandise value of 9.2 billion this year, which is an increase of 23% compared to what it was in 2020. So data it's a research firm called Red Seer that they have come up with this data. So the demand has started coming up, and e-commerce is one of the largest beneficiary. So I'm sure, sir, even during festive seasons, so when a lot of these restrictions were put on all of us, because of the COVID pandemic, it was actually the e-commerce, which came in handy for a lot of us, for a lot of the customers, because within the COVID restriction, it was through e-commerce that a lot of us, could buy whatever we wanted to buy for our relatives, for our own consumption. But the good thing is that demand has started picking up. So I'm sure it augurs all well for the e-commerce platform and through e-commerce for MSME as well, sir.
Thank you. But let me bring Mr. Vinod Kumar in. Till now, we have heard people who are on the policy side of the discussion. But Mr. Vinod Kumar, would you like to come in, because you represent the MSMEs in a manner of in their association, and how do you look at these this e-commerce and the MSMEs during the pandemic, during festive seasons when the lockouts were down? How did it really help? Did it really help? And if it did help, how did it really help the MSMEs? Which I am now, because Vidyut has already put that in place. Vinod, would you like to also include the micro industries? So when I say MSME, it is micro, small, and medium enterprises. But let us concentrate on micro and small because they are the largest in number. Vinod, would you like to come in?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity, sir. It's a pleasure to be here amongst stalwarts. Vidit sir rightly pointed out that micro is the largest segment as far as enterprises in India are concerned. Now, the way I look at it, sir, is you have producers like Ramesh sir did specify this. On one hand, we're talking about producers which are both farm-based and non-farm-based. And both of these, if you look at the Udyog registration numbers, you have a majority which is on the rural side and lesser numbers on the urban side. So that's number one. Number two, when you have both farm and non-farm producers, what do they need to take their produce into areas where consumption is there? There is certain amount of consumption on the in the rural areas itself, but a lot of consumption is in the urban areas. What are two or three things required? A, I need to have a mechanism for promoting my product. I need to have a mechanism for packaging it. I need to have a mechanism for delivering it to my end customer if I am into the B2C space, or otherwise into the B2B space. Now there, one of the things that we've been missing is market linkages where I can directly expose my product to a set of people that are interested, that would be interested. Now, what e-commerce has done, sir, is bridge that gap completely. So A, I get my product promoted. B, I also understand what different to do. Because, during the pandemic, so I'd like to specify here that we've been running certain camps, mentor camps, where we've been, people that were confused about what is going to happen, how are they going to be able to run, have employees. What we did was we said, here, let's look at one of the e-commerce places, marketplaces, and let's look at what your product is selling at, what your product category is selling at. What is the packaging like? What are the brands like? So for them, it was truly a sort of I would say classroom. They love to learn, which is right there. They also got feedback about what people were talking about other guys' products, their competitor products. And at the same time, the fact that most e-commerce marketplaces today offer fulfillment services as part of this. So he doesn't have to do anything. He has to do some very, very basic branding, product design, producing the product, obviously, yes, and then handing over to this person. And then the entire hassle of taking it forward to the customer and to, finally also getting reviews and delivering and getting the money and all that is all, all something that the e-commerce platform does. Now, in our research, what we figured out was during the pandemic, close to 2.2 crore enterprises have come online on e-commerce. And if we were to, let us say, offer a bit of a rebate here and there. Now, why rebate? What do I mean? You see, so for example, we had a woman from Surat, and this lady had a garment shop, and she used to do specific embroidery and all that. Very well received by various people. We tried to put her online. Her total turnover before this pandemic was around 30 lakhs a year. Sir. And when we tried to put her online, what came in the way is that, she had to get in a GST number. Because, the moment you are going online, GST, you have to be registered in GST. So that turned out to be a very, very big dampener. We did push her, we got her through, and from almost 6 months of no sales, she came back, but she didn't come up to 30 lakhs, but we did around 22, 23 lakhs with her. She was still satisfied that, you know, business is going on, it's moving on. But the most important thing was while we put her onto the GST bandwagon, we got her to register and did all that. She couldn't cope up with, you know, the filings required and all of that. And which essentially she told us this, that selling online was becoming costly, even though actually it should have been easier. It should have been cheaper. She should have made more money. And what we actually do understand, sir, that one of the biggest enablers of economies like ours has been e-commerce. And whether it is an international company, whether it's an Indian company, whether it's startups that are setting up these mechanisms of marketplaces and all that, this is something that this country needs today. And all of us need to figure out how do we make it easier for the micro enterprise to actually get onto this bandwagon and get his product on. And the same is also true when we look at exports, for example, sir. B2C exports hitherto has been a completely no-no, you know, because we don't know, you know, what are the markets like. We've generally been looking at, okay, you sell to another buyer who buys and then distributes in his own country or whatever he does with the product. But in the past 2 years, sir, the sort of information that has come to us from various surveys, it shows that we have a market which can be as big as $30 billion in the next 2 years, only through e-commerce exports. And who are going to be the beneficiaries, sir? Producers, again, farm and non-farm. Now, again, what are these guys? We are talking about enterprises that are highly labor intensive, sir, which will help us not only in alleviating the demographic issue that we have. Some may call it dividend, some may call it a problem, but fact is that it is a dividend if we can produce and if we can utilize all of them and provide jobs. Now, where do festivities come into this? We've seen cyclic, 40 plus international e-commerce platforms that we've viewed as part of our research into what sort of potential exists. I can share with you, sir, we have today marine farmers from Andhra Pradesh selling in Japan through one of the major websites there, which is only operating in Japan, sir. And they're only selling shrimps and a couple of other varieties of fish. Similarly, when I talk about this, I can tell you even in a country like Taiwan and Korea, you have a lot of stuff going from Odisha and UP. You know, all the Buddhist sculptures and all that are all going from these two states, sir. Similarly, when we talk about, Pashmina has a huge market around the world. And, we know that it comes from J&K primarily. And just examples of it that we've taken to 4 or 5 marketplaces, including, I would admit it is Amazon's marketplace also. We also have used Walmart. We also have used a variety of others. All of them have been extremely successful, sir. And each one of those, but the only problem is there's no mechanism for this guy to register this as export. Though UPS is picking it up, taking it to the international customer, but we don't have any foreign trade policy which includes this mechanism of export as export in the first place. So that is something that we are missing out on. So a couple of irritants here and there. Otherwise, this is the thing for micro, small enterprises in India to move forward, sir. And there's no two ways. We were also talking about, retailers and sellers and all that, sir. I'd like to specify here, sir, during the last lockdown, not this one, just the one before that, we've done a small survey. Again, what we figured out was that you have now local circles that are created by most of the websites. So if you are looking for, let's say, a small item like a toothpaste, it doesn't come to you from the head office or the major area or the main warehouse of a marketplace. It comes to you from the local shop next door. So that is also an enabler for retailers, sellers, service providers. And for us, technology has not been much of an issue. we have a huge, I would say, number of people that are working in technology. Factoring in the ONDC and the other possibilities that we are looking at, I think it's a green for us as far as e-commerce is concerned, completely.
Yeah, I think you have made some very important point. Let me just ask you one question, which then I would also raise to Pradeep, Mr. Pradeep Mehta, who has been working on the consumer side for a very long time. While we are been talking about the producer and the buyer, there is also another chain in the link, which is the retail shops. And these are the ones which are known as mom and pop shops or the neighborhood markets and market shops and so on, where you go physically to buy, and then during this festival season, you see the sales really going up. So they're not the producers, they're intermediaries, but they sell through the shops. But when they sell, the producers benefit because their produce is being sold. Now, how has e-commerce treated this segment?
So increasingly, if you look at the way e-commerce is growing, sir, from a 3-day delivery, now we have come to a point where we are saying delivery in 15 minutes. And if you don't get it, you are unhappy. You're saying, look, I didn't get my ice cream that I ordered for dessert, in this time. So it's not a good deal. But that is essentially what is going to happen in the future also. So who are the guys that are going to be able to stock and deliver to you in 15 minutes? It is those very people. It is those very neighborhood Kirana stores. In fact, I was talking in another one of the webinars, we were talking with people from Amazon and Flipkart both. Amazon claimed to have more than 28,000 neighborhood Kirana partners, which is part of their Amazon Fresh and other networks. Similarly, Flipkart said they have close to 1 lakh plus partners which are able to offer delivery very, very quickly. It could be less than 2 hours. The entire country is going to be enabled by this. And I don't feel, any of them are going to be left out in this entire, because they are going to be actual fulfillment partners for e-commerce marketplaces. And not only in major cities, but also in 2-tier, 3-tier, towns. One of the papers released claimed that 79% of new customers came from 2-tier and 3-tier towns for e-commerce entities. But they were also those that were serviced by, neighborhood shops itself. Not products didn't come from all over the way, maybe 300 kilometers away.
Okay. Pradeep, would you comment, please? Mr. Pradeep Mehta, I would like to ask you, do you agree with this about the neighborhood shops, etc., that this is the kind of change happening where they are also getting integrated into the e-commerce platforms? Mr. Pradeep Mehta? Pradeep, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. No, just wanted to unmute myself. Anyway, thank you very much. And greetings to all my co-panelists. I particularly endorse what Vinod Kumar just concluded with in terms of the kind of model which these large e-commerce companies are doing in order to become an inclusive economy, in the sense that, see, one of the biggest fears of the government, including which has been voiced by the industries minister again and again, and that, we have to protect our retail trade for various reasons. And this is one of the reasons why FDI and multi-brand retail was not allowed in the past. Though we were against it, but that is not the point. The issue is here is to understand what is the psychology in terms of our policy. Now, so what some of these big marketplaces, this includes Jio, has also got into this, linking the supply chain with the existing Kirana stores so that they are not, thrown out of the market at all. I think this is something which is innovative, not happened in other parts of the world. What is happening in India is, thanks to the policy push, that, there is an inclusive approach to this. And of course, consumers benefit. Because as he rightly said, I mean, you can get your goods ordered quite fast as compared to what would have happened in the past, sitting at your home or sitting on a computer or on your smartphone. Now, just broadly speaking, I mean, e-commerce has been growing at an accelerated pace in India. Vinod spoke about some $60 billion in terms of the SMEs exports. If you look at it, I mean, the current market forecast is by 2026, it will reach about 200 billion. And we'll probably become the second largest e-commerce market in the world after US. So you can well imagine the scale that we are talking about. Now, in that, of course, there are a lot of problems which happen with any new sector which comes in the sense that, innovation beats regulation or regulation beats innovation. So many things which are happening and the regulators are not able to, and therefore they often take a knee jerk, which is then harmful, and then go back again and again. And that is one thing which you like to see. Secondly, when we talk in terms of a level playing field, it is not only between the large and the small businesses, but also between they are domestic or whether they are foreign. We need a level playing field there as well. You can't, the domestic scale at the cost of an FDI policy. And this is even then, about 5 years ago, about this FDI multi-brand retail had spoke. Your time, Arvind, when you were the finance secretary, if you remember, when the UPA government had a lot of hue and cry about it, and needs to be revisited in order to ensure that the economy is well backed by all possible dimensions and not just approaching in this way. Now, we've already heard about the fact that what the pandemic did is to expand the e-commerce market because the consumer could order sitting at home or sitting wherever it is without going to the market. The only problem which happened at that time was the excessive courier restrictions in terms of deliveries. And that was, again, I mean, part of the problem, which of course, and then of course, we had these shopping app installs in India showed strong growth in 2020 and surged. Again, last year, surpassing 80 million. Meesho alone contributed more than 12 million downloads. These are all shopping apps. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the shift to e-commerce by at least 5 years. Thus, it is clear that e-commerce was one of the biggest cogs in the wheel to economic recovery post-COVID-19 in India and globally. And that is one of the things which is happening. Now, UNCTAD itself has taken up a big program on e-trade and e-commerce, and every year they're organizing big events. We are also a partner of UNCTAD in this particular initiative. Now, let me share with you an interesting research project we've done to study the status of e-consumers while analyzing the e-commerce space in India. Despite its growing importance, there is still minimum academic literature on the status and impact on e-consumers in developing countries like India. And therefore, the study which CIRC is doing will help to advance the academic content of the discussions. Well, we also aim to bridge this gap. The study will soon be released, but I'll highlight four important findings. Factors like convenience, cost effectiveness, and variety of products available are the biggest motivators for consumers to start availing e-commerce services. Let me repeat: convenience, cost effectiveness, and product variety. Second, consumers were more attracted during the time of COVID due to factors like time and cost saving and safe buying. When you're talking about social distancing, this is really a lot, electronic distance. So there's no question of going and meeting somebody else. Thirdly, as far as preference is concerned, electronics and other appliances were the most sought for primarily because of the discounted prices that are offered online. And this is one area where there was a lot of hue and cry by small retailers that electronic products, smartphones, etc., selling cheaper than what they could sell in the market on the street. Fair enough. I mean, this is a competitive market, and therefore you have to make the best out of what is there. Fourth, consumers do believe that there is a massive difference between online and offline prices. That's the general understanding of consumers. Almost 60% of the consumers claim that e-commerce had reduced the monthly shopping expenditure. So you are looking at consumer surplus here, and not just producer surplus on the one hand. Of course, the same thing has to matter. But as I said, we have had this kind of policy stance to promote retail sector, and with what Flipkart or Amazon is now doing is ensuring that there is an inclusive approach to bring them into the supply chain rather than to keep them outside the supply chain, which as I said, Arvind, was one of the most innovative things which has happened anywhere in the world. And that is something which must recognize. Now, consumers are expected to splurge on discretionary items during Dussehra and Diwali, if you look at the topic of this particular event, followed by the wedding season for Christmas and New Year. In preparation for the festive season during the pandemic time, e-commerce players had enhanced the accessibility of their platforms. For example, Amazon had announced to add Hindi support to its voice shopping experience and Marathi and Bengali to its customer shopping experiences. In addition to the already existing 6 Indian languages, and this is a point which needs to be flagged and highlighted in the study, which that look, there has been these kind of innovations which are happening. Now, Flipkart also noted that this festive season was the most inclusive and sustainable in the 8-year history of the company's The Big Billion Day Sale. The Flipkart app too is currently available in 11 Indian languages. It was noted that 85% of the new customer base of Amazon during Diwali 2021 came from Tier 2 cities, as has been highlighted by others. So not only is the base growing, but the contribution from smaller towns is also growing. In addition, during the festival season, especially e-commerce platforms like Amazon itself has created 1 lakh jobs across the operational network in the country. The 1 lakh jobs is not a joke, especially in the current days of unemployment. Let me then share some personal experiences at Cuts. We are engaged, we are running farmer producer organizations in the southern Rajasthan, and we're also running self-help groups. And all of them we are trying to build up slowly by a ratcheting process to link them to websites and to e-commerce marketplace, so they can sell their produce directly rather than selling it to some middleman. So we do have that kind of grassroots experience as well to show as to what could be the benefit of e-commerce as such. And that is one of the reasons why I would like to go back to the point, Mr. Swain and Ramesh, to particularly see to it that policy evolves in a manner which is not restrictive and avoid knee-jerk reactions as far as possible. For example, the consumer protection rules on e-commerce were drafted in a very, very bad manner. I mean, you're dealing with business to business issues under the consumer protection rules. So where is it, how is it that we can do something which is sensible, cogent and coherent? And that is very important, rather than to create more problems for a sector which is going to create more jobs and create more and enlarge our growth. Thank you.
I will thank you, Pradeep. Very important points. Before I go to Vidyut, because I want to ask him about the compliances which was raised also. But one point which you raised, and I think is very important, is with regard to the difference in pricing of products, the same product, offline and online. Now, obviously, when in offline pricing, the margin of the retailer also is added. Whereas in a direct sale by the producer to the customer, that margin is removed and therefore it becomes less costly, or the pricing is more competitive. In which case, the question again will be, however much you may try to, the platforms may try to integrate, as long as the producer and retailer are going to be competing on the e-platform, do you think they would be able to survive in the long run?
Let me give you an example, Arvind. About 5 or 6 years ago, that even airlines started, selling tickets directly to consumers rather than going through the travel agent at a much lower cost, and you saved a lot of money there. Now, what I'm saying is that ultimately the consumer surplus goes back into the economy in one manner or the other. Fine, there may be micro impacts, but if you look at the macro outcome, it's still far better than worrying about that. And secondly, it doesn't mean that travel agents have gone out of business. They're still there providing service.
Yeah, let me step in a bit.
They are providing services. I'm giving an example, analogy.
Airline is not a very good example because numbers impacted in terms of airline ticket sales, etc., is not the travel agent is not the same as the retailers in the country. I mean, the numbers of retailers is very huge, and as e-commerce grows, the impact on livelihoods is going to be of a different nature.
I don't think that the retail sector is going to be adversely affected at all, and especially after some of these innovative models, as I have just spoken about, or even Vinod Kumar spoke about, is something which you have to bear in mind that as far as they follow an inclusive approach, it will be good. Secondly, and importantly, I mean, why do you ignore the consumer welfare dimension of anything? If the consumer is able to get something cheaper, that saving goes back into the economy in one manner or the other.
Does it go back to the same kind of livelihood? Vinod, would you say something before I come to Vinod?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I mean, quick point I'd like to make here. We've all been through the telecom revolution, and we had millions of people that were actually having livelihood connected to STD booths and ISD booths, if you remember. Do we know where they are today? They were close to, from last count, I did some basic finding out, and we were talking about close to 80 lakh booths that were there across the country, sir. And out of them, gradually, a lot of them graduated onto mobile accessories and other things, but those that did not obviously were moved out. You see, technology is going to change per se on a constant basis. Those that don't stay up with it, those they feel, no, I'm not going to be able to change my business or the way I function or the way I work, are going to be left out. It is bound to be. But what about those ones that I can tell you, sir, right next to my house in Bombay, we have a guy who used to never ever deliver meat. I begged him for almost 5-6 years that, I'm a meat eater, so please, deliver this meat. Why do I have to come to you? You know exactly what I want. He's like, no, I have a lot of people who coming here. Believe me, sir, in the last 8 months, he's completely gone online. And after that going online, now he started offering discounts, packages, also, packs. So, you have chicken and mutton together, you can buy for X amount of money and stuff like that. Now, this is a meat seller, a guy who's not even educated, believe me, sir. But he has to compete with a Licious or a Fresh to Home. So he does not have a choice. And I would prefer to buy from him any day, believe me, because he knows me, he knows my taste, he knows exactly what I want. So there is a certain advantage all of these people have, provided they get onto this technology bandwagon and don't feel that they should never get onto it. If they feel it's not going to affect them, it will. Let's not, be closeted about it. It is going to affect. And all they need to do is step onto it.
Would you like to comment? I would like to ask you about the cost of compliances, because one issue that came up was that whereas a lot of people would like to get on to this e-commerce, and possibly you also spoke about capacity building and so on. But one of the things that we are seeing in terms of formalization of the informal sector, where most of these people will be, in a manner of speaking, there is a problem of cost of compliance. And this cost of compliance sometimes is not only in terms of money, but it also is in terms of the cumbersomeness of the compliance, which deters people from getting on board on these kind of new technologies. Would you like to reflect on that?
Thank you, sir. So before that, I'll just like to make 2 or 3 very quick points, sir. So I worked in a city called Ahmedabad, which obviously you know as the absolute home of entrepreneurs of all types. And I came across something very next to the station many years back called seasonal market. Mm-hmm. Now, initially I was confused, what on earth is a seasonal market? Then I realized that people many years back realized that there could be multiple business by the same person. So you actually have a person coming from Kutch who buys firecrackers from that particular market, another person who comes from the south of Gujarat and buys something else. Point is, sir, I have huge confidence on the abilities and the capacities, the kind of entrepreneurship which we have, which definitely will quite easily over a particular period adjust to it. I think COVID has actually quickened the whole thing. The kind of things which we never did, which probably 2 years back we couldn't even imagine. So today morning I attended a buyer sellers meet. Now coming from Gujarat cadre, we are very, we have been doing buyer sellers meet for a very, very long time, calling in people from all over the world, showing them the product. Now this was the time it was a hybrid product. There are stalls which had been put up in Leh, in Ladakh. There are people, 430 participants who are actually watching it. And everybody was involved. So the best thing is it was the producer who were involved. It was the local administration of Ladakh which was involved. It was APIDA from Government of India which was involved. There have been a lot of work has been done on that. So 1.5 months they have actually seriously worked to bring in the best of Pasmina, the best of, I think agricultural products, a lot of things. So things are changing. And I think we are now graduating into the kind of a field, a hybrid kind of a field, where the physical will stay, the virtual will continue. It is not just a question of e-commerce. The point I'm trying to make is, it is the use of electronic platforms. These were the things which probably did not exist before certain particular time because people didn't think of it. Mr. Binod Kumar, all the esteemed panelists spoke about how quickly the neighborhood grocery is also changing. The neighborhood worker is changing. There is obviously a lot of change taking place. So one thing we should also look at it is that today in MSME sector, 68% is actually services. Right. It is not just a concept of a producer selling something. Traders, which Abhishek sir talked about. Now traders is something which has been now included very much as part of the MSMEs, the retail traders and the wholesale traders. Now these are the people who are probably adapting to the new kind of a system very easily, sir. All the point I'm trying to say is that these are things which are no longer a luxury. These have become actually necessities. And I'm quite sure the kind of entrepreneurship we have in this country, people will adjust to it. A lot of good things is going to happen. So you talked about compliances. In the MSME sector, my understanding is a lot of these compliances actually take place at the state level, sir. Here, DPIIT has been doing wonderful work, which probably Ramesh sir initiated. There's a lot of work on compliances which is going on, but these are things which are of the larger variety, the bigger kind of picture. We have lots of kind of compliance issues at the state level. Some departments, last during COVID times, sir, you'll be surprised to know, I'll give you at least 3 examples, sir. Gujarat, Assam, Rajasthan. They actually declared that you can open any small business. And you can come for the compliances or any kind of a local kind of a registration after a particular period. I think they have given a particular period. So states have started doing this kind of work which facilitates the opening of a small business or continuation of it. I'm quite sure that there's a continuous effort. And as far as my ministry is concerned, yes, this is definitely one of the primary things which we do. Thank you, sir.
Let me say this to you on this, because Rajasthan was the first to enact the, what is it calls, the MSME Facilitation Act, yes, under which it said that under none of the state laws does a MSME entrepreneur require a prior NOC approval or any kind of permission for a period of 3 years from the date of registration. So they can go and do their business and nobody has to come to the state. In fact, it also bars the inspectors of different departments to go and visit. So it's purely a carte blanche, and the registration certificate is accepted. But you know, for electricity purposes, for banking purposes, and all that. But the problem is the number of compliances under central laws, because you see, MSME is one part is a generic term, MSME, but you could be in petrochemicals, you could be in something else. So each of the sector laws then have a bearing on these operating at the ground level. Now, what happened is that till you were not online, they would negotiate. Basically, it was rent seeking by the inspectors who will go take some money and turn a blind eye, and they did what they did. Once you get online and your compliances are online, everything is online, it is on record, it is very difficult to escape it. And therefore, the cost becomes very high because the number of compliances required is very high. So this is something which we had, I advised the state government on economic matters. I had told, Rajasthan government had written to central government to say, why don't you give to all the MSMEs the same kind of dispensation of a 3-year period moratorium on any kind of NOCs, etc., under central acts, barring perhaps maybe orange and red category of pollution under the pollution part, but others could be done that. So there is a problem of compliances, and if that something like this can be looked at by the central government, it would I think it would create a huge amount of energy for MSMEs to start registering and trying their luck. I'm very sure the success rate of those who register would not be more than 15 to 20%, which means 80% will register but maybe not succeed, because people try it, it works out, it doesn't work out. But that 3-year period gives them that breathing space. So it is something which will be true also for MSMEs wanting to onboard on onto e-platforms, etc. If the compliances are very high, it will be very difficult for them to be able to benefit from these platforms. It's something that perhaps Government of India could consider at their level. But the other part, which from the policy perspective, is how do you integrate various sector policies into the MSME e-commerce for MSME kind of enabler, because there are too many different policies and sometimes they're at contradiction with each other, which perhaps Kundan could also come in later, because Niti also keeps looking at these kind of things. But would you like to, Vidyut, reflect on that?
So the point regarding the compliance is very, very well taken, sir. I mean, the point which you made is something probably we have not really worked on it. To what extent compliances in other ministries also could be maybe specifically affecting the micro. We'll probably work on that. So the point regarding the policies part of it concerns, sir, I personally believe all these policies would be naturally reaction to a growing need of certain things, sir. This is as a Ministry of Enterprises, ministry essentially dealing with small business is about development, sir. And we will naturally go by what is our stakeholders' needs. The needs which we identified over the last 6-7 months, sir, during the process, and you have an ex-finance secretary, you know the process of EFCs, it's kind of a churning. So last 5-6 months was quite a bit of churning in this ministry. I think it probably happened in every ministry. And I would say that's a wonderful way of really looking into the mirror, looking into your schemes and also talking to the stakeholders and trying to find out what needs to be done. So that way, I would be very, very grateful to the way Finance Ministry works. It kind of forces us to look at our own schemes and maybe be self-critical and try to find out. So we did last 6-7 months. We have done wonderful stakeholder consultations. Like Mr. Binod has been part of it. There have been quite a few of the very, very thinkers on this particular subject who have been part of it. So certain things which came out is, let us say, number one is that we talked about a lot about exports. Now, what is the kind of handholding actually first-time exporters require? We did a lot of survey on that, got agencies to work on that, and we are coming out with schemes for first-time exporters. We also found out that to get a relevant data or to get a certified data is pretty difficult, let us say, for a person who is just trying to start out. For a larger organization, it's different. I mean, they can kind of easily find this data. So this ministry with Commerce Ministry. So these are things where ministries have to work together. It cannot be just specific to a department. So that we are coming out with a scheme in which absolutely free of cost we'll be giving to the exporters very, very certified, absolutely relevant data, bringing in at least 7 to 8 data sources together. And we hope that these are the things which will actually over a particular period teach people. Second is that a lot of emphasis now is definitely happening in this particular ministry on the use of regional language. This was talked about actually by a number of speakers, yes. Because our clientele is such that we cannot just make it one language, two language kind of a thing. We have to go. I mean, I keep telling my officers that if you have to speak in Bhojpuri tomorrow, you speak in Bhojpuri. You get somebody to translate it into Bhojpuri and tell that. You see, our client group cannot be just one type of people. It is all kinds of people. It is villagers. It is everywhere. So it is generic. So as a result, it is spread everywhere. We have to look into that. So there's another thing which we are working on is what kind of handholding we really do in digital literacy. So I'll be very happy to know that we have really worked on it over the last 5-6 months, and it is the pandemic which has actually helped us, because a lot of people have come up with this concept that what is the things that they really want. And we are coming out with pretty good schemes, sir. Quite obviously, depending on the success, to what extent we'll achieve, but digital literacy, digital handholding, how to bring this, particularly the micros, how to target it, and how do we really help them to create a website? How do we help them to get onto a platform? These are the things which will be parallel, sir. It is not just a question of, sir, to what extent e-commerce will be useful. I think it's something which has been debated, and which is more obvious. We cannot really stay away from the electronic world. It is a question that it should not affect really somebody who is his livelihood, and that is the most important thing. But what I think is very, very important is also get our micro enterprises spread all over the countries, smallest of the towns, smallest of the villages, to not only get on the electronic platform to learn about it, and also to get all the qualities which are also required, sir. I'll give an example, sir. I keep buying toys, sir. Toys, incidentally, is a DPIIT territory, but that is my personal kind of passion, where I buy toys from all over the world. So I do use e-commerce for things in which something comes in wrapped in a regional language paper, and I find the toys are broken. This is a very, very ordinary issue, but the fact remains is that is what convinced me that it's not just a question of getting on the platforms. It is also doing a lot of physical things. There are many physical things which has to go into the producer's way of working. Then only he will start succeeding, sir. So what I think policies should just not be limited to a concept of e-commerce or electronic platform. Policy has to go way beyond it. We have to continue doing our tradition.
Including warehousing and
exactly. A lot of things. There are a lot of things which have to go.
Yes.
Thank you.
But Ramesh, I'd like to ask you one question which keeps coming up, that there are a lot of innovations in e-commerce which have got limited because of policy intervention. For instance, there is a limit to flash sales in the new e-commerce policy. And during festive seasons, these kind of sales actually have a big role to play in pushing the products into the to the consumers. Do you think that there is some kind of lack of understanding of the sector while looking at the policy formulations at the formulation stage?
Sir, if you permit, I will just give a slightly longer answer. Sir, if you see the impact of e-commerce, let's say on offline trade, because this is also linked to that question. Out of the overall retail market, I don't know the exact numbers today, but it would be something like $700 or $800 billion. 10% was roughly organized retail, and about 3% was the share of e-commerce. Now the e-commerce volumes are growing up, but so is the retail market, including the unorganized retail. So, sir, and out of e-commerce sales, I think roughly 70% are electronic products and apparel. So if you see the overall impact of e-commerce sales on offline traders, sir, one can accordingly kind of see the impact cannot be enormous or the way it is sometimes made out to be. Secondly, sir, so far as these festive sales are concerned and flash sales are concerned, sir, the concern is on discounting. Now, sir, if I know the correct price of a product, then I can make out what is the discount offered. But, sir, what is the correct price of the product is also something which is debatable, sir. Sir, a year or two back, I went to buy a fridge from a very large organized retailer. And when he showed me the price, I told him that this is available at this price on e-commerce. So he immediately offered me that price. So, sir, now that large retailer, who is very large, one of the largest in the country, sir, I don't know what exactly is the correct price. So the issue of discounting is very complex because we don't know the correct price. And also, sir, so far as the discounting is concerned, there has to be one policy.
But should there be a policy intervention on that, or should the market be left to level it out?
Sir, that's what I was coming to, sir. Sir, so far the discounting is concerned, now one cannot be selective about discounting in a particular mode of delivery of commerce, let's say goods and services. There has to be a holistic approach in the country, and there has to be a law, so that the discounting on e-commerce is one factor which cannot be condoned, and discounting in offline can be condoned. It's not something that's a good idea. Either you have a policy or law. In my opinion, there should be no policy, no law for regulating such commercial decisions like discounting. But if there cannot be selective in one particular mode of delivering goods and services. There has to be a comprehensive approach. But, sir, of course, I absolutely think that commercial decisions are best left to people. Government job and regulators' job is to promote competition and protect consumers. I think that is where we should focus on.
Right. Kundan, is Niti Aayog also seized of these issues in some way? I mean, are you looking at how the policies can be made conducive for the MSMEs to grow and as at the same time also benefit the consumer?
Sir, thank you, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I would rather take up a different question in terms of not whole for the MSME, but MSME and e-commerce, the
Okay.
platform.
Okay.
So that is one sector that where we are actually working, and we see what the level of difficulties that MSMEs are facing while onboarding the e-commerce platform. You raised a question to Swan sir on the compliance burden. So I see it from a different perspective. So when today's topic of discussion is e-commerce, there are two sets of compliance burden. One is while the companies are being incorporated, being registered as MSMEs or something, there the company has to face one set of compliance. The other set of compliance is while they are being onboarded to the e-commerce or e-marketplace. So that is where again, we are trying to come up with a framework. Although it's an area where it is the e-marketplace owners and the sellers, but the difficulty which the MSMEs are facing there is again something to look is a factor to look into, because if I'm a seller, I get onboarded to one e-marketplace, that doesn't actually get me to the another e-marketplace. I still have to go through another set of compliance burden. So there, maybe what we are trying to propose, that there can be a general framework, and if a particular seller complies on a particular e-marketplace, that can automatically lead him or her to be onboarded on the other e-marketplace. That way, the access of the MSMEs, because we know as per the definition also across the MSME, it's a very wide sector, and there are differentiated level of abilities and disabilities. So if we kind of enable one seller to be onboarded, and as a consequence it gets onboarded on the other platforms also, other e-marketplaces also, it will kind of not only restrict and reduce the compliance burden for a lot of MSMEs, it will act as a great facilitator. So we are trying to come up with some kind of a framework, but I'm sure there would be other stakeholders, ministries, which will have to work together with. So that is one, sir. I would like to inform the August gathering here that the DPIIT, the erstwhile department of Ramesh Abhishek sir, is actively thinking, or I think they have. I'm a little unaware, but they have, I think, made a soft launch of ONDC, which is Open Network Digital Commerce. It's an open network, sir. And it is like what UPI is to a lot of this financial transaction which is happening. That ONDC again is going to facilitate a lot of sellers and buyers, which hitherto is only limited to a particular e-marketplace. So once this open ONDC is in place, I mean, a lot of these MSMEs which are onboarded on e-marketplace will get a free flow with this ONDC. That again is going to do a lot of benefit in onboarding MSMEs on e-commerce sector. So we at NITI are cognizant of this fact, sir, that e-commerce is a very big platform, and if MSMEs have to grow, they also have to take resort to e-commerce, and therefore we are also conducting a study, and we are almost about to complete that study, where we have come up. We'll definitely come up with a set of recommendation for the stakeholders, ministries, which takes into account a lot of the issues which have been discussed today, like how boosting exports through MSMEs will be a great enabler for them, how digital literacy will be a great enabler for them, how access to credit lines will be a great enabler for them, and also how can we can protect a lot of these small MSMEs, and how can we guarantee their returns and cancellation, which is one of the most attractive feature of MSMEs. and also to create awareness around them. So I am told I have not myself experienced, but I would request Swain sir to look into this, that the MSMEmart.com, which is which is a kind of a B2B marketplace, if that can be converted into a wholesale e-marketplace, where right now this website only has categories of product and leaves it to the buyer to buy and do the logistics. So if this website can be converted to e-marketplace, can again help a lot of these MSMEs players.
Thank you, Kundan. One other issue which I would like to flag to you is that compliances are not, there is these multifarious compliances, not just for the MSMEs, etc., but also for the platforms. And therefore, unless we ease all of them together, one part itself may not really help in easing the doing business for the on the e-commerce platforms. Finally, Pradeep, let me ask you one question, which is, I think, going to be the way forward. Do you think that some of the policies require a relook so that they become the ecosystem becomes more conducive for MSMEs in their effort to get onboarded on these platforms? Pradeep?
Yeah, I mean, generally this discussion that we've had so far does reveal some amount of ignorance about various facts. And therefore, we need to understand that we need to build capacity, and particularly our small sector as well. We carried out 3 workshops in the East and Northeast India, supported by the US Consulate in Calcutta, on cybercrime with SMEs. And that was a very interesting experience that we had. It was in Patna, Guwahati, and Cuttack, or Bhubaneswar, I think, one of them. The experience that we had in terms, and there was a very lively exchange in the sense that people didn't know or didn't understand many of these issues. And many of the issues that we're discussing here. Now, Ramesh spoke about the fact in terms of, he responded on discount sales, etc., etc. What we tend to forget is we have 2 excellent redressal laws like the Competition Act and the Consumer Protection Act, which are already there in spite of, you don't have to spell out e-commerce. I'm giving you an example. CCI, Competition Commission of India, has done an excellent study on e-commerce. And I was talking to the DPIIT officials, and I found them to be ignorant about it. They didn't know that CCI had done such study. So within the government itself, there are policy silos, there are awareness silos as well, which needs to be cracked open, and which is where Mr. Swain would please make a note of it as to how we can, develop better awareness generation among the small scale sector, and particularly among our policymakers on many of these things. Now, Ramesh, just to answer your question in terms of discounting, etc. Under the Competition Act, you can, take them to the Commission on Abuse of Dominance if in case you prove it, that there was a collective abuse of dominance. And there are various. Consumer Protection Act itself provides a lot of relief, a lot of redressal, and it doesn't exclude e-commerce from its ambit, or scope of services to define it, deficiency in service and so on. The point which I'm trying to make is that we need to have a better understanding about many of these issues among our policymakers as well as among our businesses to deal with. And Arvind, you're right in terms of compliances. It's a nightmare. The regulatory cholesterol. Just the other day, ORF and Team Lease put out a study showing like 28,000 plus criminal offenses in our compliance laws across here, and Gujarat was probably leading in it. So Swain may have liked to speak about it. Something like 3,000 compliances. If they were not complied with, then they could also invite a jail sentence. Something which we have to understand is that, as the Prime Minister often says, that we have to respect our wealth creators. And that is something which is very important, whether the wealth creator is a a small vendor next door selling apples or fruits or bananas, or the big industry which is up there selling whatever they are selling. And that applies, Arvind, as you rightly said, whether it's offline or online, many of these things cut across the swath of whether it's offline or online. As I said, even these laws that I'm talking about, they apply offline as well as online. There's no stopping about it. And what has happened in the Consumer Protection Act 2001, the new law has also covered e-commerce and financial issues explicitly. So there is no question of anybody trying to dodge it or get out of it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would any of the panelists like to come in at this stage before we close, because we are now coming to the end of the webinar. Yes, Kundan.
Sir, I would like to respond to Mr. Pradeep Mehta here on this regulatory cholesterol, that the report that he quoted. We have had an internal deliberation on the report. I would like to inform the August gathering. The report itself says that the 29 labor codes, once integrated, which has been integrated into 4 labor codes, will reduce 61% of the clauses of compliances and imprisonment put together. So this is a job which has already been done. So and if a report only to sensationalize takes into account things which have already been done, and it is just awaiting something, it is not a very good report. I mean, I'm sorry to say that. I would respect the authors, but only to sensationalize the way, and compliance things, sir, you have been in the government, Ramesh sir has been in the government, it's an ongoing process. Secondly, the report talks about Companies Act. So the Companies Act, the decriminalization of lot of these sections have already taken place. They also mentioned that. So we have to also very categorically look into those reports also, which just try to sensationalize and obscure the efforts being taken by the government. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sir, if I can
just
briefly interject, sir.
Yes, yes.
Sir, I was part of a workshop organized by CCI with its chairman and members when they were doing a study on e-commerce. Sir, the issue there, of course, is that an entity has to enjoy a dominant position, and then its market abuse can be looked into as a competition issues. Sir, here there are a lot of small issues that come up all the time on discounting, and not everybody can approach the Competition Commission of India. Yes. The problem is that people are trying to impose a separate set of rules on e-commerce players and a separate rule on somebody else. But obviously, if there is a clear clarity, then it has to apply to everybody across the board. That's the point I was making.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Arvind, Dr. Didar Singh had raised his hand.
Yes. Who is
Dr. Didar Singh? Yes. Who is there?
Didar, are you there? Dr. Didar Singh, are you there?
He has left.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So no, I get the point that Kundan you have made, and obviously government continues to make efforts and bring out changes. But then it is also important for us to give that kind of an allowance to studies which believe that if 61% of the provisions for criminalizing have gone away from all laws, it also leaves 39% still there. And that needs to be also looked at. It's just that I don't think anybody sensationalizes these things, but obviously the perspective when you are inside the government and when you are outside the government becomes different. And I think it's healthy that it is like that, because if everybody began to see things like the government sees, nothing would change. And if everybody started seeing things like those who are not in the government see, obviously there will be huge amount of frustration, because we don't understand the limitations in which the government works. So there has to, I think it's a give and take. So we shouldn't get very worried when criticism comes our way, because we know that we make an effort, but sometimes it also shows us things like I'm grateful to Vidyut for having noted the fact that MSMEs are impacted by sector laws also. It is not just the MSME Act. And those sector laws impinge upon it. Now, it would come to our notice naturally. I mean, when I was in the government, it didn't come to my notice naturally when I was sitting somewhere, because I was only looking at my sector. But when you are outside, then you are able to look at many things, because in any case, you are not responsible for anything. So you can just go around looking at things in whichever way you want. But I take your point, and I think it's commendable that a lot of work is being done to reduce compliances, which I think is a major burden for businesses. There, Mr. M.M. Sharma would like to say something. I see his hand raised. Mr. Sharma? Mr. M.M. Sharma.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. In fact, I would just like to sort of clear some whatever has been discussed. I joined very late, so I'd like to clear about the.
We'll have to be very brief because we are running out of time.
Yes.
I think any point of time the technology might cut us off. So
I'm sure.
Nowadays,
no,
technology
just that the MSMEs can approach only when there is abuse of dominance needs to be corrected. It's not only the dominance part that the Competition Commission looks into. There are issues about the vertical restraints also. So the e-commerce companies, if there are small vendors, because we've been representing some of them, the small companies can approach even if there is a vertical restraint. There is a subsection 3 of section 4 which also takes care. So need not be a dominant company alone. In fact, the cases going on against Amazon are not under abuse of dominance provision. That shit needs to be noted. It's not that only Uber and Ola, nobody was held dominant, but still cases were there. So it is I just wanted to add, so that law should be very clear.
Yeah.
The provision should be understood very clearly. It is not, people actually have been hyping about abuse of dominance. It is not only abuse of dominance which the competition law takes care. The competition law takes care for any unreasonable restraint put on a player by a platform. A platform has to be neutral. The platform has to be like a shop, like a shopping mall. It cannot become what is called as a retailer. That's what is happening. So these are issues which are, of course, very vexed. I can't explain them more than what I have done. So it is not only abuse of dominance. I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a very important point that you have made. Of course, I'm very sure all these issues are being taken care of or looked at. I want to thank all of you very much. India is a land of festivities, and every day is a festival. We generally are people who like festivals. And therefore, much of the sales also happen around festivals. Just before the webinar, I was mentioning that whereas in the Western countries, they have had to create festivals like Father's Day and Mother's Day, etc., to push sales. In India, we have adequate number of festivals in every region, which is different, unique. But now with the e-commerce, what is happening is that a producer in Rajasthan, for instance, can make sales during the Bihu festivals in Assam or Pongal festival in Kerala. So this is a new world which is opening up before us, and it is growing. And therefore, the concerns that we have all shared today, I think, will all make us a little wiser and make us think a little harder on what are the kind of things we can do to make this ecosystem more conducive for the small MSMEs, especially micro and cottage industries, the artisans, neighborhood shops, etc., benefit more from the festivities that we enjoy so much in the country. Thank you very much for being here with us. I'll hand it over to Garima to conclude.
I would like to thank all our esteemed panelists for such an interesting and insightful discussion on festive economy and e-commerce sales of MSMEs in India. for sharing their experience and perspective. As the panelists highlight, e-commerce has become an inescapable reality. It helps in expanding the outreach of MSMEs and enable them to compete with domestic as well as foreign sellers. The policy framework for e-commerce should focus on an integrated policy, keeping the interests of all the stakeholders in mind and ensuring a level playing field between all the domestic as well as foreign e-commerce platforms. Given the growing scale of e-commerce in India, its benefits to consumers as well as sellers, particularly MSMEs, it's a crucial area for India's economy. We hope to build knowledge through our research in this area, taking in consideration the insights brought out in this discussion today. Thank you all for joining the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sirs.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, ma'am.